Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Drama ahead of the Austrian Grand Prix as Lewis Hamilton suggests the FIA needs to step in and make changes to prevent periods of dominance the Red Bull currently have extending into the future. Max Verstappen says, unlucky mate, you had it good, while Mercedes were dominating. Who's right, who's wrong, or could both of them actually be making an interesting point here? Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Firstly, Sergio Perez, not at the track today or participating in media duties. Feeling unfortunately unwell, and this is obviously comes at a time where he really needs a good weekend. He's had several stinkers now in a row, 3 weekends in a row now, right, that he hasn't been in Q3. Far from optimal, and he does confirm here on his social media that he wasn't feeling so good yesterday, decided to go straight to the hotel to recover in time. So wishing Perez the best, but he does need a good weekend, it's got to be said. These are the rear wings that have been spotted in the garage. It's around about 700 meters above sea level, the Red Bull ring in Spielberg. So they run, I think the air density goes down by like something like 7-8% at that altitude. So it's more challenging for the engines, but also it means that higher wings will generally be run than you thought might be. So it's usually medium, high. And as usual, seems like there's a bit more wing angle on this Red Bull, certainly than there is on the Ferrari. So those are the early shots we have. There's also these shots of the new McLaren side pods. And as you can see, this is the top version up here, which looks, look, the older version looked a bit similar to a Red Bull as well in its own way, but the undercut is very clear, and look, again, it's another Red Bull inspired design to a certain extent, as you would expect. This is Norris's car up top. This is Piastri's car down low, because they don't have the upgrades on both cars this weekend. Either they couldn't get them there in time, or they want to do some analysis across the different cars, which might be valuable for them fundamentally, because they're kind of, you know, a little bit in no man's land right now in terms of where their pace is going to come from. And we can see here that Toby Gruner does indeed say that Oscar Piastri will get it, I think, in Silverstone, but for now it's only going to be Norris who gets to enjoy them this weekend, if of course they work. Let's talk about some Red Bull drama then. So first of all, we saw yesterday the news that AlphaTauri is going to disappear. Yuki Tsunoda reckons that just a straight up return to Toro Rosso would be pretty cool, and I feel like that's the way they might lean, to be honest, but who knows about that. Also, Nick De Vries responded to some of Helmut Marko's comments where he says, we've been disappointed by De Vries, and says, look, I think he'd appreciate it if I can prove him wrong. That's how it works, but he might be running out of time to achieve that, as might Perez be if he continues to have bad races. But Helmut Marko does play down the likelihood of Ricciardo stepping in. He says, yes, he's done some tests. That doesn't have much to do with the sporting side. Perez has had some very good races, but also some very bad ones. He needs to step up and perform as well as he can. So, you know, Marco's putting out the challenge to anyone, as he always does, but, you know, he's definitely honest with his opinions, and he says it how he feels it. One set of individuals that might not do that are certain engineers and drivers. We get this comment here from Pierre Vacher over on the Red Bull side, suggesting that the cost cap penalty they have from overspending in 2021, that has affected them for the last few months and will continue to, apparently it's affected them anyway, he reckons it's going to have a massive impact. I think the penalties could for sure affect the current development of this car, and maybe closing up the grid this year, but it will also massively affect next year's car. So, okay, this is where we get back to the debate. Obviously, Red Bull are going to say, oh yeah, this penalty is so draconian, I think was the word that Horner used, and you look at it now and you're thinking, has it really done that much? Now, it's early days for how much this penalty should have done. At this point in the season, we wouldn't really have expected the penalty to have any reasonable effect. This car was designed before the penalty, the 10% reduction in testing time came into effect, but I don't think many people realistically expected to have a massive effect, because going into next year, Red Bull can already, and Horner even said that they basically are, just focusing on next year's car. And this is where Hamilton has his thoughts on the matter. He weighs into the discussion here today and decided it's about time someone says something pretty spicy about Red Bull again, and we get a nice bit of Hamilton versus Red Bull drama and Hamilton versus Verstappen drama, because we haven't had too much, to be fair, since there's been quite the difference in performance between the two cars. So Hamilton says, completely disagreeing with what we just saw from the Red Bull engineer, and says the penalty didn't cost them anything. It definitely didn't. It is so small. So, you know, that's his perspective. And obviously, Hamilton and Mercedes are going to say this, and obviously Red Bull are going to say the other perspective. It is how it is. But, you know, you've got to expect it at this point. So Hamilton also says this weekend is going to be probably better than Canada. That's what they reckon. They reckon it could be a similar track to Barcelona in some sense. And he also says, look, more excited for Silverstone because they can take a small step there with their upgrade. Apparently it's a major upgrade, but Hamilton doesn't want to gas it up too much. And he says that he's not still fully comfortable with the car and can't extract 100% from himself as long as the car isn't where he wants it to be, and they're going to get there next year, and they've got to focus on next year's car. But Red Bull already are, and this is the question that he comes up with to the media and says, look, it's likely bit by bit that by the end of this year we will catch Red Bull, but that's only because they are probably already focusing on next year's car because they're so far ahead. He then comes out with the idea, and I'll share it for you guys here, that what if the FIA said, you know what, there's going to be a date at some point in the season when you are allowed to work on next year's design. Before then, you can't anymore. You have to focus on this year's car, and then when a certain date comes around, then you can start building next year's car.
It's likely that bit, by the end of the year, we'll probably, catch Red Bull, but that's only because they're probably already focusing on next year's car because they're so far ahead. They don't have to make any changes to this year's car anymore because they're so far ahead. He's cruising at 100 points ahead of us, and yeah, I think the FIA should probably put a time when everyone's allowed to start developing on the next year's car. So August 1st, that's when everybody can start, so that no one can get an advantage on the next year, because that sucks. Do you not think? It would make more sense, but of course they're not. Yeah, they should, because you shouldn't. Say, for example, you start the season, you have you have a bad car. You could just say, actually, I'm not going to bother with developing this car. I'll put all this money into next year's car and have an advantage. So,
can I say you had a similar situation in the past with your team?
Yeah, we never started as early as them, but yeah, no, it is, and that's what I'm saying. It needs to change because that's why you have dominance for so long. And they keep allowing it to happen.
We weren't talking about that when he was winning his championships, right? So I don't think we should now. That's how Formula One works. When you have a competitive car, yeah, it's great. But at one point, of course, you also have to look ahead to the year next. But I mean, it's normal, of course, people behind us say these kind of things, but they should also not forget when they were winning how it was looking, and if people would comment these kind of things, then probably they would also say different, well, it would comment a bit different, but that's how it goes in Formula One.
A new car actually starts a lot earlier than people think it does, and the W10, our 2019 car, started actually in the dying months of 2017.
So Verstappen, of course, gets quizzed about this and says, like, I don't know what this guy's talking about, right? He had it good when he was winning, and, so of course we should be able to enjoy the same luxury now. And fair enough. But as Hamilton was saying towards the end there, and to be honest, Hamilton's idea, well, maybe good in theory, would be very difficult to actually implement. But I will say that if a driver that wasn't Hamilton said this from like another random team, it probably would have been thought, yeah, actually that's a pretty good idea. But just because, it's Hamilton and Mercedes, like, obviously it's going to get criticised, and Hamilton should expect it to get criticised given his position, and he was asked about this. Now, there actually is a lot more context to this quote than was shown, at least has been reported by Sky Sports, and this is from race fans. In my 17 years of being here, before I even got here, so in Formula One, you see a period, a time of dominance, and it continues to happen. I was really fortunate to have one of those periods. Max is having that now, but with the way it's going to continue to happen over and over again. I don't think we need that in the sport. In my personal experience, when you're so far ahead, and if you are 100 points ahead, you don't really need to do a lot more development of your car, so you can start earlier on next year's. And this is especially the point now, is that the budget cap is a thing. Back in, like, let's say Hamilton's dominant days with Mercedes, theoretically, you could spend as much as you wanted, right? So you could develop as much as you wanted this year's car and also still focus on next year's. But with the budget cap over the 12-month period, you have to choose between the two of them, maybe to a greater extent now than you did previously. So maybe that's what Hamilton's getting at here. And he says, okay, let's say August the 1st, everyone starts at that point. So no one has a head start. It's an actual race over those few months to develop the car. He says maybe that would help everyone be closer. I might be wrong about it. When we were winning championships, that's what he did. But he also did say that, like Red Bull started developing earlier than we ever did. Not sure that's technically true, because as I shared in that clip there from James Allison, that was a video from a couple of years ago, and he said that they started work on their 2019 car over 12 months in advance. So Mercedes definitely in the past have abused this to their advantage. Their car's so good, they can start focusing on the concept for a year or even 2 years ahead. And as Hamilton mentions, Brawn back in 2009, okay, they weren't Brawn in 2008, but like Honda or whatever, they developed hard that car, blitzed everybody at the start of the year, because if you know your car's bad, then I guess you can also put all your eggs into one basket. So it's a tricky one to really decipher, because Hamilton might make a fair point here in some respects, that at some some point there might be reason to bring this to an end, because the idea of the cost cap, the idea of the testing time is to prevent a team having a dominant period. But as Hamilton says, if their car is good or even if their car's bad, they can just fully focus on next year's whenever they like and still maintain that advantage. And maybe that is a flaw in the system that we presently have that is trying to prevent periods of dominance. And maybe if it was Charles Leclerc saying this, then it would be a slightly different story in terms of how people are talking about it. But fundamentally, Verstappen's also right that, well, Hamilton got his period of dominance and they would always start next year's car much earlier. I should be able to enjoy that as well, which is fair enough. But maybe at some point the rules on this are going to change. And also, how do you even possibly police that, right? August the 1st, let's say as an example. Like, what are the teams doing before then? Is it like August the 1st, midnight, everyone gets on their laptops and gets ready to go? Because obviously the previous year's car is going to be pretty similar to the next year's car in some respects. So they will also be thinking about it. I don't know how you even police that, to be honest. It might be one of these things that maybe sounds like a reasonable idea on paper, but in reality can never be actually enforced. And just one final thing to close out the video here. The FIA has actually done something this weekend. They've amended the rules regarding the sprint shootout. You guys might remember in Baku, Norris put it into sprint qualifying 3, but had no new sets of soft tyres. And the rule stated you must drive out on a new set of softs. He had no new set of softs. He could have potentially done a lap on the wet tyres or something, but they decided it's kind of pointless to do that. So they've changed the rules so that if you don't have a brand new set, you can still race. It just has to be on a soft tyre. So that's happening this weekend. Very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.